So we're talking about the busting of the oil trust and all that, and this was that, just like in the same, and so just like in the same period, in this quadrant here, we had in our times we had the computer age coming, and the internet and the World Wide Web, and so and that would have been from 1982. 2016. So we have, this great wealth and all that being created, and also in 1882, this was a time when when they were reforming immigration laws, and there was sort of like a backlash against immigration, and Congress, so they made laws about excluding a lot of peoples and all, and it was a big deal back at that time. And so here we are again when that came around the cycle, and immigration is a real big thing. So anyway, so we get up here where we're talking about Roosevelt. So Roosevelt was pretty much like the common man again. Teddy Roosevelt, even though he was a Republican, but he busted up the trusts, and there was there was a great social reform, everything during this time. And then we get up here from there to 1916, and we talked about Wilson getting elected and coming in. 1932. Well, now remember, this was about sharing the wealth in a part. Now Roosevelt didn't say share the wealth per se, but he said, hey, let's have a more of a level playing field. We can't have all the money going up into a few pockets, and we have to, share it a bit. And this happened over here then in 1932. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in and said, yes, let's, this is for the, we have to all share in this prosperity. Now this all goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the family and the government, and, hey, that person got this big a share, I'm in this family too, and I'm only getting this little bit, well, you get this huge feast, and that isn't fair, and all that stuff. So there it is, recurring again in 1932, and then we come up here to 1949, and Truman is president then, and he's a bit like Madison in the sense that, or Monroe, I should say. Monroe, when he was like the fifth president, and you remember that back in the 1799, the 1800 election, Jefferson came in power, and then following him was Madison, and then James Monroe, who was essentially of that group, and kept everything going, but also made a very strong stance, saying, Monroe did, that this hemisphere, we don't want those European powers or the great powers over there coming in our hemisphere and mucking about. We want you out of here, and we'll keep you out, kind of thing. And so Truman is over here, and he says, well, basically the same for the whole world. We don't want to have evil in the world system. And remember that world system that came with 1916 and 1949 was in the United Nations and all that. So the evil had to go, and they had the atomic bomb and all that to make sure that would. So that was their statement. Okay, so now we come here in 1949. So that was Truman, and we get here to 1966, and this was LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and this was the civil rights era and all that. This is the time for the movement forward towards Jehovah's kingdom. What's fair and what isn't fair and all that. So this was your hippie movement around in this time too, and the movement toward fraternity. The very front end, the people wanted to move toward that even then, and that's going to bear fruit as we're coming up this way. Well, anyway, but who was the president at that time was Johnson, and he had this vision of the great society where we would actually provide for the resurrection of others, you know, and all that. Well, that the money getters didn't like that, and those with the greed, and but essentially the money getters, those who control the levers of power and all that. And so we come down here to 1980, and Ronald Reagan comes in and gets elected, and he's got this vision of the world becoming, you know, one world kind of thing. Remember, because we're moving toward that one world thing, and so that's what he was giving forth there. And so then we come over here to 1999. Well, this is very close to G.W. Bush, but Bill Clinton was still president at this time, and he was like the common man, perceived as being the common man, you know, old Bubba, you know, and we come up here to 2016, and we have the sort of reaction against, you know, the holding. Now, what is this holding action? This is like a holding action in a sense as well. There's a lot of things that go on in the wheel, and I only touched on a few things. There's a lot of things at play, and this action here. I wanted to mention, you see, his opposition was Hillary Clinton, and now she was of the machine politics. So she was, but there was going to be a change here. This is a change from going down here in the land of the beast into the land of freedom and independence, and freedom from all that. And so people wanted want things simpler here. We arrived at 2016. All this complexity and all that. We want things simple. Donald Trump says we can make it simple. So, and Hillary's steady as she goes, don't rock the boat, and then through the WikiLeaks and all that, there was learned, about the machinery of politics, from the Democratic National Convention, those records, some of those that got released and all that. So it was plain, so for the people, instead of simplicity with her, saw this sort of complexity going there. Well, there was a lot more things going on than just that, but that's one of the things that, but as we progress into the future, that means then, regardless of what is established here, that here there's going to be movement more toward this one world and toward fraternity. You're going to see fraternalists coming forth in great numbers here. And now it may be that they'll be forced to become fraternalists because Jehovah's hand behind this matter, and it just all depends upon the reactionary forces and the progressive, those of the progression. Well, it says in Oahspe that I am with the righteous, and that evil shall not triumph through might. Now, the word triumph there is interesting because what it means is that the beast oftentimes looks at a battle and say, well, we've won the battle, therefore we've won the war. But that isn't really what goes on. What goes on is that they may win some battles, but they're going to just ultimately lose the war. And so it's going to be somewhere in here, presumably, fraternalists versus the those who are trying to hold on to the old system in order. And one of the reasons that goes on during this particular quadrant is because things get established up here with Cephas. They go around the wheel, and there's a movement. Te is calling right now. Te is calling in this quadrant. Te is calling man forth to labor for the good of humanity. Now Donald Trump is answering that. He says, "Yes, I can answer." And of course he has his mindset on the money getter thing. He's a perpetuation of that, and still that's his idea of, he's still responding to the call of K. He says, "This is how Jehovah's kingdom on earth. This is my idea of Jehovah's kingdom on earth," and so he's going to go forth and try to establish that. The paternalists are going to say, "Well, that isn't really it at all. It's this other thing." And so, and also we have to bear in mind that during this time, that Jehovah has created God has created a new army of workers to go forth, and those workers are the vegans. Now, what that means is that the old established order. Well, part of that old established order is the cattle and the beef industry and all that. Well, back in 1882, that's essentially when the cowboys and the old cattle rangers, the old cattle drives and all, essentially they ended. By that time they were done. No more. The cowboys essentially gone and all that. And so now we're coming up to 2016, and we have the vegan army of God going forth. They're not going to be able to stop him. Now, Trump had a gut reaction, that throw them all in jail. Well, that's just that's just words, because you can't really just throw them all in jail. It's what he'd like to do. In his gut, he'd like to do that, but in reality, here on this level of people dealing, because he'd have the fraternalists to deal with as well as just rational, reasonable people who don't want that, who think, hey, that's going too far, and all that. So why? Because it's directly opposed to Jehovah, the movement of Jehovah. So you got a mixed bag with Mr. Trump. And anyway, so it's possible that during this time we'll see some conflict between the beefy boys, and the fraternalists. It's possible, and the reason that I say it is possible because this is the quadrant where war is often used as a solution to problems by the beast. So what we're going to see is that when we go around here, now this is the fourth quadrant, or whatever was established here, and the fourth quadrant always integrates and tries to harmonize and tries to hold everything together. So they're going to try to hold together that which was established up here previously, which is the worldwide thing. So he'll undoubtedly keep that going, but that will keep, whether he does or not, certainly those that follow. But anyway, there will certainly the fraternalists are going to essentially ascend in triumph, and fraternity will get the fraternal social order will get and the world will move toward fraternity. That's the progress of Jehovah. It can't be stopped. Now the beast may try to stop it, but he's not going to be successful. As I say, there's battles and then there's the war. And the beast cannot tell when the war is over. So that's the problem, because he can't defeat Jehovah, the Almighty, the Great Spirit. And so that's what we can look forward to. We mentioned about here in 2016 about rogue politics. And the question comes up, well, now Mr. Trump, according to the tradition, has won the Electoral College. But the fact of the matter is that the Electoral College in the United States are the ones who actually elect the president. And because of that, and there's certain constraints that they're supposed to have, each state sets up their own rules and all that in that regard, but essentially the tradition is that you go with what the majority has voted. But if there have been times in the past where a few have changed their minds, and there was a movement afloat to try and, well, amongst the electors themselves, to try and vote not for Trump. Then they would have to either vote for Hillary Clinton, or else they would have to vote for someone else, in which case then they'd have to get a lot more votes, a lot bigger group of the electors to do that, because whoever has the majority. And so if they go from, the easiest route is to go from Trump to Hillary, because she already has a great number, and when it drops for Trump, it goes up for Clinton. Well, that's the idea that they're supposed to do, but if they do that, the Electoral College is going to, itself is going to be perceived as rogue, you see, because they're going out of the tradition. So either way, we have this sort of start of the rogue politics. And this statement is made not just simply on account of this, but where in another cycle where we'll be heading. And I'll mention that that will be mentioned in other videos here. And even on this video, though, we're moving toward fraternalism. So anyway, the other mention that consideration for this wheel is down in this point right down here, which was most recently between 1982 and 2016, the midpoint 1999, and it was mentioned that Bill Clinton was president, and the world celebrated at that time around the turn. They celebrated the one world, and fireworks in a way everywhere around the Capitol and all that. But wanted to mention that in order for the Republic's social system to work, well, it was set up to try and defeat tyranny. And so they had all these checks and balances. And so we have to remember that even no matter who becomes president, the president is merely the presiding officer of the executive branch of the American government. There's two other branches of power in the United States government that have a voice. So although it is a very important post, because that particular post also deals with foreign policy, and that's very important for this one world vision that is in the world. So now the part about tyranny is, starting down here, way back here in 1866, well, Lincoln got elected, and the old established order was, slavery, and the southern states, who had the basically the slaves, and for the most part, and they stood the most to lose from their point of view of losing slavery and all that. So when Lincoln got in, they separated themselves from the Union. At least they tried to. Anyway, but that whole, before this there was compromise, there was talking back and forth. And that's the only way, in the way that this republic is set up, that's the only way really that people can go forth in a rather, in the smoothest possible fashion. But at this time, now the reason I'm bringing this up is because then the radical Republicans came in, and they, at that time, they were called the Radical Republicans, the freeing of the Negroes, as said back in the 60s, and the blacks, the African Americans, the freeing of them. This was, they set up what was called Reconstruction, reconstructing the South, to help them to set up their economy in a way that did not depend upon slavery and all that. And really what happened during that time then became a tyranny of the majority, so to speak. because they wouldn't listen to the other side. That was over with. The other side had essentially dropped out and made war. Well, war was made. And anyway, and so they had the tyranny of a small minority there. Well, actually, it was the tyranny of the majority, because they were the majority, the minority within the majority party, and they were very strong, and in the spirit of righteousness that they had, that they set forth these laws. Well, that particular aspect reoccurred here in the build-up to 1999, with the 1994 in that Congress when Bill Clinton was elected in '92, and then Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey who were representatives in the House of Representatives. Well, he wrote a book called Contract with America, and essentially it sort of mirrored what happened back in 1866, because only now the shoe is on the other foot. And the Republicans said, well, we're not going to compromise. The days of compromise are over. We're pushing our thing through. And so that particular aspect, the mind aspect, has been going along then with the Republicans, because Newt Gingrich was a Republican and Dick Armey was a Republican. That was the Republican, and they took over the House of Representatives after 40 years of Democratic control. And so the Republicans more or less adopted a rule all or ruin all philosophy, in the sense that, no negotiation. What we read in Oahspe about poison. Poison is a substance that does not yield, does not give, there's no back and forth, give and take. It's like, and you can't, it's just all set. The body can't deal with it. Okay, so that being the case, the body politic is somewhat similar, so that if somebody becomes extremely rigid and becomes essentially the tyranny of the majority, which if Mr. Trump comes in, it would seem as if then that the tyranny of the majority has won. Except we have to remember, as mentioned, that the Republicans themselves, the Republican Party itself, has been sort of, they weren't all along with the election, with the nomination of Donald Trump to be their candidate. So there's already dissension within the party. So whether or not they're going to be a unified party to sort of enforce that tyranny of the majority, well, so-called majority, because as mentioned, they represent only about a quarter of the population or so. Because, I don't know what the percentage of people that voted during this election, but normally it's, if you figure around 50% of the eligible voters and vote, and then half of those, more or less, are Republicans, more or less half are Democrats. So that makes about a quarter of the people. And but anyway, as far as politics in the nation's capital and all that, that represents a majority. And so they have all three houses of power now, the Republicans do. And so that's a consideration to take in. Now, if Hillary Clinton, if the Electoral College delegates do toss it over to Hillary Clinton, which traditionally is unlikely, this is not an unprecedented case, because back in 1882, the election, this was actually the election of Garfield, was in 1880. And 4 years prior to that, so just right down in here, just prior to that, 1876, there were two candidates. There was the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate. And the Democratic candidate had actually won the election as far as electoral votes and all that, but there was a movement for a compromise. The South wanted the Reconstruction to end, so they made a deal that they would put in a Republican president, who was Hayes, and say, you can have your man as long as he promises to keep, to end Reconstruction. And so Hayes went along with it, and so we had the president, by a little bit of sort of shenanigans in the House of Representatives, because if there's a dispute, it's supposed to go to the House of Representatives, and then they're supposed to decide it. Now that didn't happen last time in the case of Bush versus Gore. That actually went to the Supreme Court instead, but traditionally it was supposed to go to the House of Representatives to decide that in a disputed election. But anyway, so those are considerations, and so this what's going on here. So it would not be totally unprecedented for the Electoral College but that many votes, to turn that many votes over, that's a huge task. And so we'll see what happens. It doesn't change the fact of rogue politics, because when you have like this opposition and you don't have this flexibility of this back and forth and compromise, then that gives rise to the rogue politics, because that's essentially the only way it's almost essentially like warfare in the political arena. And of course they do call it campaigns, like a war campaign type of thing. And actually this stiffness and this unwillingness to compromise with the opposition and all that, well, now it's sort of self-perpetuating and helps the rogue state forward, because in this way, because the rigidity itself, what it does now, the Democratic Party, they look at this and they go, well, look, they're opposing us. Of course we can't get anything done. They're just stopping everything. There's nothing that we can do. And the people thought, well, hey, nothing's getting done. And the Republicans say, it's the Democrats' fault. And the Democrats say, it's the Republicans' fault. And the public probably says something along the lines of, well, game as usual, they're blaming each other. And they have a very low rating around in their small teens anyway for the Congress, but the point being that after all that obstructionism, the Republican candidate appears to have won the election, and so the Democrats look at that and they'll say, hey, look at what they did. They did all this obstruction and stuff like that, and then boom, we got blamed for it. Well, maybe that's the route to power, to just stick with our principles and stay with them and don't bend. And then, and nothing gets done, and so you blame that party. They're in power, they're in power, so we have to get them out if you want stuff done. And so there's that possibility that type of a thing will come forth. I'm not going to say that it will happen, but I'm saying that it paves the way for that type of a thing to occur. So that's another consideration in this regard. And so this is, and we have to remember regarding the fraternalists too, and the beasts and all that, that the beast, it says in Oahspe that the beast destroys itself.